Hello, everyone. Today we have with us a non-native speaker of the English language. His name is Nikita, and in this conversation that we're going to have today, we'll touch upon some topics of language learning and hope you get something useful out of this. Hello, Nikita. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Everything's okay. So
Okay.
let me introduce myself, as you asked me before. So my name is Nikita. I was born and raised in Russia, and I still live in here. Many years ago, when I was at school, I got interested in English and started learning that. And eventually, I became a teacher of English, and I teach English now. But it was a really long way. So, as you might understand, when I was in school, I didn't learn English very well, and it was really tough to do that. Would
Okay.
you would you like to hear the story, the whole story behind?
We can surely go into that. But before we touch upon that, I believe Russia is mostly a monolingual country, right? So when it comes to learning English, how many Russians take learning English seriously? Could you just talk about that?
It's a very interesting question. So everyone should learn English at school, in schools, but after school, like barely like one of 10,000 people can speak. But so we have a lot of international companies here. That's why people in Moscow tend to know English better than people from other regions, because all of the international companies are concentrated in Moscow. So if we talk about Moscow, so Moscow is great in English. I think you can meet somebody in the street and ask him, and probably more likely he will speak English. But if it's another part of Russia, that's unlikely that you will find anyone speaking English. But yeah, I think it's a very small amount of people who can actually speak English very well.
So what was your motivation to learn English in a predominantly monolingual country? Did you think that it would give you better career prospects, or did you wish to travel, or what were the motives behind you mastering this language?
That's a very interesting question again. As I mentioned before, I was interested in that pretty early when I was in school. And I think it was because we had a lot of movies and cartoons, games, video games, and everything was in English. And I really wanted to understand those things. That was my first like motivation, and eventually I became interested in just English-speaking countries, America, like Canada, U.S., Australia, England. That was my motivation. But if we speak about other people who I meet, so their motivation, yeah, mostly career, right? You can have better career knowing English. You can make more money. That's true.
I'll just tell you something about myself. I started learning Spanish after I was 21 years old, and I don't know exactly what the motivation was at that point of time, but then I saw that there were better career prospects if you could speak Spanish, because India is a country where we receive a lot of work outsourced from the US and from other European countries. So having the knowledge of a foreign language helps a lot, and that's where I thought I really need to do this well if I need to progress in my career. And that's when I got really serious with Spanish. And I must say that the teachers that I had played a fundamental role in helping me understand this language. Did you manage to learn English on your own, or would you say that teachers played an important role for you?
This is a very good question again. So, of course, I started by my own. I didn't have any other options. And yeah, so when you try to do it alone, you probably you're probably going to lose your motivation quite often. And I think the reason for that you don't know what exactly you should do, what's the next step to take. And teachers, in this sense, they help a lot. But I didn't have that opportunity. And actually, when I was learning language alone, I had less progress. And just recently, like 5 years ago, I started hiring people because I had an opportunity to do that. And yes, so my personal opinion that it is better to work with a like private teacher, personal tutor, because he or she can give you directions, exact directions. And that at the same time helps you to be more efficient in learning. You start learning faster, and then you stop losing your motivation. It's like, it's all connected, right? Because you can see your progress, and you can remember your first lesson with your teacher when you could barely say a word, and after a couple of months you can have a conversation, like casual conversation, but you can have it already. So I don't remember the question exactly. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, we were talking about the importance of teachers versus learning a language on your own.
I think if you need to learn it quickly and effectively, and you would like to have motivation, really great motivation, you should go to and find a professional teacher. To do it by on your own, it's very difficult. But I guess if it's this like your native language and you learn, for example, English, and you start learning Spanish, for example, it is a little bit easier because you can imagine the way. Yeah, you need where to start. But at the same time, it's going to be easier with the teacher. Anyways, he or she can provide that support which you need, which you cannot get like when you are alone.
Now, given the fact that you live in Russia, how did you manage to create an environment where English became a part of your life and you could actively use it? Because if you don't stay in a country where they speak the language, then what's left is creating that environment on your own. For me, it was working in a call center for about more than a year that really helped me improve my Spanish. So, how did you inculcate English in your daily life staying in Russia?
It's a very good idea, right? To do something in the language you would like to learn. That's a really great idea. So you can do many things which are obvious, right? You can read books, you can watch movies, you can watch TV shows, and many other things, which are pretty obvious. But usually it doesn't help, right? Because you do not use that. I found it quite. So the only thing I could do, so I hired teachers, native speakers, and I had a couple of lessons during each week. And also I work in English, right? I teach people, and I prefer to help people with their test preparation, like TOEFL or IELTS. And those students, they are usually really advanced. And I can have a conversation with them, and I just need to explain them how the test works, and it helps me, yeah, to keep on going. And you know that like recently I started a vlog. This is like one more thing keep to keep going, right? Because I could like record those videos alone, but I decided to upload them to not to lose consistency, because it's kind of a commitment. I have a channel and I need to do something, and this is a way to to keep it going, to keep it rolling, right? Not to stop doing something. The idea is, right, to use the language. When you passively consume it, reading books, watching movies, I notice that I do not improve. Sometimes it just, I can hear that, yeah, correct. But my speaking is getting worse after a while if I do not use it at all. So I think your example is the best. You need to do something. And actually, from time to time, there are a lot of online courses, like maybe you heard about Coursera or many other Skillshare. And those resources, they are in English. And you have an opportunity to study something in English. And you have different tasks there. You need to perform in English. That makes sense, actually. That's a great idea to study something, to learn something in English. Not English, but some subject in English.
Now, when it comes to the topic of getting in touch with native speakers online, my recommendation is to hire a teacher, and that would be the best option for most people. Yet, I've had people telling me that when they tried to find a native speaker, and I'm not talking about a professor or a tutor, just someone with whom to chat, they've
Right.
said that they've reached out to many people. They say hi, hello, the introductions take place, but then the conversation goes nowhere and then they lose touch. So, what exactly is the problem that most non native speakers of English are facing when trying to find a native speaker with whom to speak, who's not a professor, so to say?
Right, right, right. Of course, when I started speaking, I had this problem. I wanted to find someone to talk with. I mean, native speakers, of course. And I registered at a couple of websites, and I could not find anyone. And when well, maybe I found a couple of people, we could not really talk. I don't know what happened, but we said hi, yeah, hello, how are you? And then, like, at the end. I think the problem is that you do not click like people. You need to find people who you have similar topics to talk about. For example, you like English literature, and that guy from the US, he like is a student of literature course in some university, right? And you have something in common. You have topics to talk, and you should be interesting for that person, and that person should be interesting to you. Then it works. But when it comes to websites where you can just find some, regular people, uh, they are different. Mostly they are on people on those websites. They are just trying to learn as many languages as possible. For example, if somebody from the US can speak Russian, probably he or she is like learned a couple of more languages. And they'll just ask a couple of questions and that's it. They are not interested in you as a person. And so when it comes to hiring people, it even doesn't matter if he is a professional tutor or just a person. Those people, they would like to have a conversation actually. And the reason for that can be different, but they are already showing you, I'm ready to talk, like pay me some money and I'll talk to you. But it's tricky too, because at some point I noticed that I can understand, for example, people from the south of the US, because many reasons for that, because they speak slow, a little bit slower, and yeah. But I could not understand, for example, people from Great Britain, because they have completely different accent, and when they speak pretty quickly, it's almost impossible to understand anything. And I kind of made a commitment to hire people from different parts of the world, from English-speaking countries, and just having conversation. And I realized that some people, they do that because they really would like to help someone. And those teachers are great. Like despite of the facts are professionals or not professionals, it's not very important actually. And so after a while, I met a couple of, from like any country, you can find good teachers who can really help you and you have a great conversation with them. And actually, you do not want to stop working with them. You would like to continue. But some of them, they're like, yeah, how are you? And so on. Let's talk about grammar. Let's learn some grammar. You need to be very selective, actually. You need to find a person who you really like, I think. You need to have 1 million questions to that person, right? And if he gives your examples and answers with enjoyment, with pleasure, your conversation is going to be great. And when you have that type of conversation, you are improving better and faster, 100%. And once you have some kind of tension, you do not click, we are talking about some topics which are not interesting to you, and you don't have any chance to ask questions, I think it's not effective. You should stop working with that person. He or she is just trying to get some money from you.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because teachers that really can look at something long term know that they are responsible for getting the results for their students. So what I do, I have a few students who I teach Spanish to in India. So what I did was I created an Excel sheet where they can log their progress. I talk about the mistakes that they make, and they can record those mistakes and not repeat them in the future. So I would definitely say a teacher, whether a professional or a non-professional teacher, with who you click really matters a lot. Now, coming to the topic of the learning the language itself, I say there are three phases. There's the beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced. And the hardest phase is that of the intermediate stage. I remember I had given my Delhi exams and I was still unable to understand the news. This despite having B1 or B2. So could you just touch upon why learning a language gets so hard at the intermediate stage and how can we overcome that barrier?
Hmm. I think that's completely different from country to country because of the differences in the language. For example, in Russia, we don't have articles. In Russian language, in the Russian language, we don't have articles, and it's almost impossible for a Russian to understand those. But when you follow the certain steps, like one by one, and you explain people those little things which they need to know in the beginning, actually, and at the same time, so it's my way of working. Yeah, I give them some grammar, for example. I'll explain how it's connected to language level, those levels of English. Um, so in the beginning, we just learn grammar, those little things which are different from Russian, and at the same time, I implement them immediately. I ask them to use them like immediately. We learn some tense. Let's use it. Let's use it, and they start speaking, right? Eventually they start speaking. Then they come to that level, intermediate level, and there they just, people usually do not understand what they should do, what they need to do, because grammar is learned, and for the whole, probably for the whole their life they had that opinion that the grammar is the most important thing. But now grammar is learned, they have no idea what to do then. And after that, you just need to speak, as, in my opinion, you just need to start speaking as much as possible. To speak to people, to find some materials which are interesting for you, like videos on YouTube and many, many others. It's tough because it's really difficult to track your achievements at that point, right? When you are in the beginning, it's very easy to track. You learn that rule, you learn that rule, you learn that rule, and it's pretty easy. But when you're intermediate or advanced or even beyond advanced, it's almost impossible. And at that point, people usually can lose their motivation, right? And teacher, a good teacher can be very, very helpful because he can design for you, for example, some schedule where you work on some topic. For example, you need some engineering stuff, and you in the first class you try to speak about engineering, like you as a student you realize, oh, I cannot talk about that. That's a problem. After a while, in a couple of months, you have the same conversation on the same topic, and you can speak actually on that topic because you learn some vocabulary, you watched a couple of videos, you read some news with that native speaker, and he explained a lot, and you could understand that. And eventually, after a couple of months, you can speak about engineering easily, and you can see your improvement. I think this is one of the ways how it can be done when you're pretty advanced. It comes to, right, intermediate level, advanced level, right. The problem with that, yes, because it's very easy, difficult to track, and it's very difficult to keep your own, your morale high.
Now, another pressing question of most beginners is they want to be able to think in the target language from day one. I actually made a video about that, saying if you're using your native language to learn your target language and you find yourself translating, that's okay if you're just a beginner, because as a beginner you don't have that large amount of input, so you don't know how a native speaker would communicate. You've not had so many conversations, so you don't know the structure of the sentences and the way they're said. So I often tell beginners it's not a crime to translate from your native tongue to your target language when you're just starting out as a beginner. A better goal would be to be able to think in your native language once you're at a higher intermediate level or at an advanced level. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As an example, you can say, I did that when I started, and look, I can speak, right? I did the same, and many of my students did the same, and now they are speakers. They use their English at work, and they are pretty successful. They live in many different countries, English-speaking countries, and everything is fine. So I could be more, I would be more helpful if I would know, for example, Hindi right now, and I could talk about the differences. It's because so it's pretty easy to explain. As a non-native speaker, you cannot understand how the sentences is built. It's impossible because, for example, English has fixed structure. You have fixed word order in the sentence. Of course, there are some exceptions, but we talk about regular sentences. And for example, in Russian, you can put words like whatever you want, any place, and you will change, the sense of the sentence, the emotion of the sentence doing that, and it's very tricky actually in Russian. But in English, you have fixed word order, and for many Russians, it's almost impossible to understand at the beginning. And how you can show that? You can show it translating the sentences, and look how it's built, right? Look how it's done. Of course, and the second thing I would mention that we have a lot of so the language, our native language, it shapes the way we think 100%, right? And so an Englishman, he is going to think differently because English shaped his way of thinking, right? And to understand those differences, of course, you need to translate. Yeah, and there are many things which you need to explain in your own language because, for example, in Russian we don't have so many words which exist in English, and the best way to explain them is to do it in Russian. So I think that's okay in the beginning, but after you learned the structure of the sentences, how it works, it's better to try to do everything in English, of course, but not in the beginning. And it can be, for some people, it can be actually scary, right? To have the whole class in English in the beginning. You cannot understand a word. How are you are going to perform on the lesson? I think, yeah, you're right. So it's totally okay. It's totally okay. But anyways, you should, as a teacher, for example, you should try to speak in English as much as possible, maybe just slowly, and ask your students to do the same. The first thing, actually, we live like in the 21st century. Everybody has everybody has phones and so on. And the first thing I ask my students to do is to write messages, to text messages, because it's easier. They have some time to think, and this is the first step, right? You learn some grammar, you know how to build a sentence, and you can text me. It's not that stressful. So when I immediately ask you to give me an answer to some question, it's pretty stressful. You're like, oh, what to do, how to say that. But when you need to text something, you can look up the word in the dictionary, and you have some time to think. That's less stressful, and it's a good start, actually, to start speaking.
Before we come to the conclusion of this conversation, can you talk a bit about the role patience plays in learning a language? I remember when I was a beginner, I wanted to learn as much as possible, as soon as possible. And every time I would read something and I didn't understand the content, or every time I watched a video and I didn't understand what was being shown, I felt really frustrated. And there were times I really wanted to give up. Even at the intermediate stage, I couldn't understand the news in Spanish. So my teacher told me, Kunal, you need to have patience. This takes time. We're living in a generation where we want everything right now and everything's
Right.
available at the click of a button. So, how would you talk about patience with respect to language learning?
I hate the same experience actually, and especially it's very frustrating when you're pretty advanced. You can speak already, you can read already, but for example, when you turn on your TV and watch CNN, you cannot understand a word. And you're like, how is that possible? Maybe it's not impossible to do. Yes, so that's very important to have that patience. And I think you mentioned again, you mentioned your teacher. And your teacher is the person who can support you at those moments. He can tell you, okay, it's okay, it's fine. Everybody has like this stage, this step in their learning process, and that's fine. This support is very important, I think. you do not lose your motivation because of your teacher. And when you're alone, you can be really depressed. But I think it's mostly about your personality. If you are persistent, you will, anyways, you'll achieve what you want, right? And it's just mostly because of you, like that you can speak English right now. I think you are an advanced Spanish speaker right now. So it's mostly about your personality. But it's very important because so like it's not a very pleasant thing, but in Russia we have a lot of fake courses, but they I think exist all around the world, like English in 2 hours, English in a week. And to me it's
Yeah,
like completely
that's
laughable. Right, right. For me it's completely laughable because it took me almost 20 years to be at this level where I am now, and it is not perfect. Yeah, I have tons of mistakes. Like I have tons of thoughts at the same time. It's very difficult to, connect your sentences, to speak coherently. And look at that, like almost 20 years. That's crazy to say. That's crazy to think, right? You need to be very, very patient. But it was just was my way. Of course, it's possible to do it quicker. So, according to my experience, using that type of teaching which I use right now, it takes like from beginning to pretty advanced level. It takes 1 year, 2 year, like from 1 year to 2 years, something like that, in that range. It's possible to start speaking pretty good in couple of years, actually. So people should not be so scary. It's not that long. But usually, if you are familiar with Cambridge books, like something like that, and many other publishers, they are courses designed to study English for 7 years to become at least advanced. I think that's not the case, and you should not follow those programs. As a teacher, you should design your programs for your students, like based on their needs, actually. For example, some people, they need just to talk, and that means they do not need to write a lot. And they are different skills, actually. So, yes, so you need to be very patient, but having a good teacher can help with that.
So you mentioned at the start of this conversation that now you vlog very frequently. So if anyone would like to watch your content, where could they find you?
Oh, they just need to go. So it's just a start, and I'm not sure that I continue doing that. But yeah, I have a YouTube channel which I started recently. It's called Non-Native Speaker. You can yeah, try to find that on YouTube.
All right. So for this, for my Spanish speaking audience, if you'd like to see the progress of a non-native speaker, you can definitely check out Nikita's channel. He too lives in a monolingual country like you all. So most of my Spanish speaking audience do live in monolingual countries, and they too are trying to learn English. So hopefully when they watch your vlog, they might be inspired by the same. And I'll definitely leave the link for your YouTube channel in this video. And I'd like to thank you so much for giving your input as a non-native English speaker. And I hope that the conversation we've had can bring a lot of value to the viewers who've been watching this.
I hope so. I hope so. And yeah, I would like to tell everybody that everything is possible. You just need to be patient and you need to be motivated in a way where you really want that. If you really want that, everything is possible. You just need to surround yourself with right people, I mean teachers, good teachers, for example, and just to be patient. You were right about that.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Hope to collaborate soon with you in the future.
Yeah, hope so. Yeah. You can message me and text me anytime. So yeah, let's keep in touch.